What's up, everybody? Welcome to Make Things Tiny. My name is Mick, and today we're talking about tiny houses, affordable housing, and community development. I'm talking to Akili and Ashlee. They're the creators of the Kelly Factory and TINYJXN. They're going to talk a little about what their company does, the tiny house side of what they do, and then also sort of talk about their background, their experience, and what they see as sort of the future when it comes to sort of advocating for affordable housing, how tiny houses and tiny house communities can kind of be at the forefront of that. So this is a great video for those of you who are interested in affordable housing. I know a lot of you who are looking to go tiny are looking to do it in a way that's sustainable and affordable. So I know this is going to be a great conversation for a lot of you to sort of like watch and learn from their experience and get advice from them as well too. For those of you who are new to the channel, please do take time to subscribe. It helps me out a ton. You tap the notification bell so you find out when I drop new videos. I drop new videos every single week. So let's get into it. Let's talk about tiny houses, affordable housing, and community development. I'm here today with Akili and Ashlee. Thank you guys so much for being on the channel. I'm super excited to talk to both of you, the creators of the Kelly Factory and then TINYJXN. If you don't mind just taking a second and talking a little bit about your background, what led you to start the Kelly Factory and TINYJXN, and we'll just go from there.
Definitely appreciate the opportunity to speak with you, speak with your audience, and this is a privilege for us, so we appreciate it. Again, my name is Akili Kelly. Here with my wife, Ashlee Kelly, Dr. Ashlee Kelly. And how we started our company and how we initially started TINYJXN. We participated in a startup weekend event where we basically had to pitch a new business over the weekend, basically over a period of 3 days, and had to kind of put it together as if we were actually developing a business for the first time, developing a business plan, coming up with marketing strategies, value propositions, but just kind of compressed in that time frame. And we ended up pitching tiny homes and basically being a tiny home developer. That's something that I've always had an interest in, and we just saw this as an opportunity to see what it would take to actually develop it as a business. And we end up pitching that idea, going through the process, and end up winning that competition of first place. And as a result, we were able to get some assistance with actually getting the business started, actually getting some legal consultation and some other access to some other marketing resources. So we just kind of took that as a sign of, hey, this is something that we should actually kind of pursue and really put some effort towards. So we end up, starting the LLC officially, and probably less than 3 months or 3 or 4 months later, we had our first tiny home client, and it just kind of been going from there.
Yeah, you're supposed to start your background.
Well, I'm a licensed architect, graduated from Southern University in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, with a bachelor's of architecture. Me and Ashlee, we both met in grad school at Jackson State University. We both received a master's in urban and regional planning, and that also kind of is related to what it is that we do now, as far as not just being so focused on the individual building, but also paying attention to the context of where those buildings reside, the communities, and the larger scale of it. So I think our urban planning backgrounds have kind of molded the way that we look at the type of developments and projects that we ultimately pursue.
Yeah, so I have a bachelor's in political science, like you said, a master's in urban planning, and a PhD in public administration. My background's in community economic development, environmental planning, public policy, proposal writing. And about a year after TINYJXN, we started the Kelly Factory because we wanted to utilize all of our skills and education. Whereas with tiny homes, we learned early on it would kind of be a bit of a challenging and slow process. So we still wanted to, use our skills outside of, employment while we were working like on our tiny home projects.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. It sounds like both of you sort of combined have a really great skill set that can be applied to not just tiny houses in general, but community development in general, like urban development, that sort of thing. So I think that's really great, and I definitely think we need more people with your sort of background in the tiny house industry. As housing continues to go up and things continue to change, there's definitely a need for people to sort of think about tiny houses in that affordable sort of like housing space.
Yeah,
What does yeah,
go
go ahead.
ahead. I
I
was
was
gonna
gonna
say
say
my
what does
okay.
the Kelly Factory offer?
And it basically operates as a more so a traditional architecture company. We provide
Okay.
architectural services, both residential, commercial. We kind of do a mix of both. We actually do more commercial with the Kelly Factory than residential, whereas TINYJXN is primarily the tiny home kind of development scope of those services that we provide. We do a lot of adaptive kind of reuse type projects. We're working on a project now in Jackson where there used to be an old vacant bank that's being converted into a restaurant, bar and grill.
Oh,
And,
cool.
we've done some other type, adaptive reuse type projects where, you take a building that was, either vacant or just had some previous use and kind of repurpose it.
Okay. That sounds really cool. I think that makes a lot of sense too with what you're sort of doing. So I see where like you could use your skills either towards the tiny house industry or towards just urban development and sort of like redeveloping different areas in general.
Yeah.
Mhm. I know that affordable housing is an important topic for you all, and I know that it's an important topic just in the country as things continue to get more and more expensive. Like, in your opinion, based on sort of your experience and the work that you do, how do you see tiny houses sort of addressing affordable housing in general, but then also, I guess, where you all are located too?
Um, for me, tiny homes was one of the interventions I listed in my dissertation about affordable housing.
Hmm.
So it is definitely a good option. And it has multiple target markets. So it has people who are interested in downsizing, empty nesters, young professionals, small or new families, veterans, homeless population. So it kind of goes across the board.
Hmm.
And I think I think it's a good option, alternative to affordable housing, but tiny homes are still kind of viewed as short term. So I'm
Hmm.
interested in what it looks like long term. I think building communities, not just housing, providing amenities, or make a good case for it being long term housing. But I definitely think it's a very good option, the most affordable option, and outside, I guess, like adaptive reuse for affordable housing.
Hmm.
Yep. And also, the biggest aspect that kind of hinders the affordability of the kind of current housing developments is just the increased cost of materials, and
Right.
what tiny homes, just from just the kind of scale reduction, you're able to uh, greatly minimize the cost of construction, but also keeping that same level of quality that you would see in a traditionally sized homes. And that's one of the things that we wanted to specialize in the tiny homes that we developed. There's the extreme versions where you've seen them where they've been 100 square feet, and some of them less
Hmm.
than that. But the first tiny home we developed in Jackson, it was about 520 square feet, and in that square footage, we were able to fit, basically two full bedrooms and one bath. And the bedroom, actually has a walk-in closet, and the bathroom, has, full-size appliances. The kitchen has full-size appliances. So, and if you think about, most apartments are kind of, um, if you can kind of compare them to, what a traditional tiny home would be, where a 1,000 square foot apartment would be viewed as large, but a thousand
Hmm.
square foot home, not so much, but people, live in these type of living arrangements all the time. So it's almost where it's just trying to kind of change that narrative that, people already kind of live minimalist lifestyles, but it's just, it's just not promoted or viewed as such.
Yeah, I always tell people you probably live in a tiny home, but most people, the average person doesn't know their square footage. So
Right.
particularly in major cities where people stay, in apartments and condos and stuff, those tend to have very small square footage. So technically they are in a tiny home, but I feel like phrasing it as a tiny home it's more a trendy term for something that has already existed forever.
Mhm. No, that's true, especially in places like, like New York City, you're living in like a, 200, 300 square foot loft, that sort of thing too. So, yeah, I do think that it is a bit of sort of like changing people's mindset. And what you're saying with being able to use less materials, especially with the goods cost of materials going up, that's another great point. And I do think with more tiny house communities popping up, we are going to see more people trying to get creative with creating smaller home communities. Like I know that there's one I've mentioned a few times before that's outside of Atlanta, the South Park cottages, the micro home community down there. That's a great example. Like their price ranges in the like 100 to 200K, and the largest house goes up to 330 square feet. But it looks like a just a standard subdivision, sort of like the footprint of it looks just like houses with backyards and parking and like parks and sidewalks. So I think over time we're going to see a lot more people sort of gravitate towards that, because there's nothing we're not going to be able to change the housing market. We're not going to be able to make it cheaper. And 400K is a lot of money, and where I'm at in San Diego, it's like $1 million if you want to buy a house, and that's just not it's not practical for most people living in this country.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I also think we're gonna see people kind of revert back to multi-generational housing too to make it more affordable.
Mm-hmm.
Which, if I would have thought about it, that would have been a great option. Either I would have thought about staying with family longer, or maybe I should have bought a house as a toddler. I'm not sure.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
and even touching with that, one of the things that we set out to do is not only develop these individual units, but to also, kind of look at it as being able to develop, kind of small communities or small kind of, villages or multiple units together. And, and there's a movement and other, kind of housing methods where, you have these kind of intentional communities, whether it be co-housing communities or, these kind of eco villages where, you know, um, individuals come together and instead of, them going to purchase a home in some already established subdivision, you may have 10 or 15 individual families that will come together and basically, develop, a housing community to support, that existing kind of network. And I think tiny homes, would kind of lend itself more to that option, and also, to increase kind of the affordability aspect of where you're able to pool resources together as opposed to, relying on to, one household's, income. If you pool 15 households together and whether it be even some type of condominium type development, or some just kind of shared resource type development, I think tiny homes would kind of make that possible, and it may become more necessary as, like we've kind of mentioned, how, this kind of traditional way of houses are being developed, is it's going to become, unsustainable at some point, because, like you said, the housing costs are going up, but, the wages aren't going up to match that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I also discussed that like wages have been really stagnant since the late 60s, early 70s. So yeah, so people are gonna have to find, or government agencies, local communities are gonna have to find a better alternative to address housing. I feel like the infrastructure is already there and it already exists, but it's just kind of connecting the dots and resources.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's a good point. And I also think that just building more communities will help get us back to a place where we're getting community, because we are more isolated, we are less connected to each other, we don't talk to our neighbors the way that we used to, and I think a lot of that is all connected. So I do think that that's a really good point too. Yeah, I think it unfortunately it is going to kind of be on us to make these changes, because I don't see too many like governments sort of like talking to some of these developers that put in like these really expensive, new housing developments, and putting caps on how much you can charge people. Even the rent stuff, there's no rent caps either. So as rent
Right.
continues to go up too, so there's just just a lot of areas where housing insecurity is becoming impossible to avoid. So I do think that that's a good that makes a lot of sense with the multi-generational sort of like approach, or just pooling resources. Yeah, I think we really aren't going to have much of a choice in the next 5 or 10 years.
Yeah. And I guess it's also important to note the role that banks play as well. For them, it's not in their best interest to support affordable housing because they don't know if they're going to get a profit from that. So
Right.
there aren't many incentives for developers to create affordable housing when they can just charge as much as they can. And people are going to always find ways to pay for it. For the most part, people who can, they're going to find ways to pay for it. So it's like, you hear these stories where it's like, oh, the rent is going up by this much, but it is what it is. So I just have to find out how to afford it or get a roommate or something else,
Yep.
So, plenty of blame to spread around.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's true. And I know that you mentioned a little bit earlier, you touched on the initial proposal that you had with the tiny house sort of like village in your area. What is the sort of status of that proposal? Like, what's that project look like? Like, do you know how long that will take?
Are you talking about the tiny house community we're working on right now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're still going through the city's kind of approval process, and because it did go out for a RFP, so they're still kind of
Okay.
working through that to be able to, um, before ground could actually start to break. So we're kind of in that entitlement and kind of a city portion of the development. So the next phase, after that would of course, be kind of like finalizing the design and layout of the proposed unit. So we're kind of working on those in tandem.
And I guess also it's
Okay.
important to note too that, it's it's housing to address homelessness, but it hasn't quite been the smoothest process as well because people hear that they hear a concentration of homelessness, and not everyone has been happy about that process. So I think in terms of education, you can educate people on many things. Like, okay, you want people off the streets. Just not having a bunch of people or tents or trash around is already going to improve your property value. But also, it's important to
Right.
have a community, and this particular nonprofit offers wraparound services. So they're not only going to house people, but they're going to get them in the best condition possible for them to secure, permanent housing or permanent employment or something so they can move on, they can help other people. So, it's one of those, they experience a NIMBYism kind of situation. So while most people are happy because they're like, okay, tiny homes are cool, we're addressing the housing situation, not everyone has been, happy about that. And that's really the challenge when it comes to me, tiny housing, tiny homes in some communities, not all communities, because West Coast, I think the further west you get, the more innovative and open they are. They have been, at the forefront of the movement, creating policies, and maybe not even just tiny homes, but it's like, okay, you can convert your garage into housing. And so that can help with, not only addressing the housing issue, but, you can make you a little extra money to help you if you're able to place someone back there. But there's also there's this part of it where people don't like them. So that's been very interesting. Tiny homes aren't prohibited in Jackson, but like I said, I think because they've gained so much popularity, because people are seeing such extreme situations, and because people have assumptions about some people who stay in tiny homes, not everyone is excited about them. So that's kind of the flip side of it, and that played a role in why we started the Kelly Factory, because we're like, okay, in between this fight, what do we do?
Right. Yeah. No, that makes sense too. I think that something's got to give though, right? Because I think that, people they don't like the visibility of the homeless community across the United States, right? Like people feel like we don't want to see it, but also the solution for it. You can't fight the solutions for it too. So I do think
Right.
something's got to give.
Yeah.
because people do need housing. They need a place to live. So you can't really be like, oh well, I don't want to see homeless people walking around, but I also don't want you to put them in a tiny house community too close to where I live. Like there's got to be some sort of give there. But yeah, it's true. We are still a little ways away from people seeing the tiny house movement as something beyond people just kind of like camping or sort of like people that are just kind of like traveling across the country. I think
Right.
that some of the laws you're right, on the West Coast are a little more like helpful. Like I know like here in San Diego, there's a lot of support now for ADUs. So tiny houses are sort of like becoming really, really popular here because people have properties, they have land, they want to put it in their backyard so that they can make money and they can rent it out. So I think that that's becoming more. I think there's like ways to sort of, I guess, frame it or use different language so that people can sort of start to shift their mentality around what it means to be in a smaller footprint, because that's all it is. It's just a smaller footprint.
Right.
A house is a house, at the end of the day.
Right.
Hmm.
And then housing to me is a basic human right too.
Yeah, of
So
course. Yeah, I think that is like an interesting sort of like reality that I don't think has sunken in yet in our society, especially at sort of like the higher levels, like higher up. I think people, on the day to day, you could talk to someone and it's obvious that like you need a roof over your head, but I think it's interesting to see how much pushback there is at the city level. Governments sort of not being supportive of, this is just the best. I think this makes the most sense. So I guess time will tell as things sort of change. But there are some more tiny house communities popping up on the East Coast, and there are some popping up in the South too. So I do think that it's slowly shifting. But yeah, it's great that you were able to create the Kelly Factory in the meantime, so that you aren't just sort of fighting the city or people's perceptions, and then not getting a chance to sort of like make the impact the way that you want to.
yeah.
Mhm. What advice would you give to someone who's interested in sort of, I don't know, if like following in your footsteps to an extent, like someone who's interested in tiny houses, and specifically for like community development, like urban development, based on some of your experiences and your background, what advice would you give to that person?
I think one thing, and just kind of going back to that whole community building aspect or potential of tiny homes, I think that if you had enough people, and it could be five, it could be six, or whatever that number is. I think if you were able to just get and if y'all just start meeting up one day, like some like-minded people, like, hey,
Mhm.
how can we live together? How can we, you know, you know, work together to, uh, develop our own community, and what does that look like? And I think, because, everything is so political, and I think that the more people that you get saying the same things, then you'll see, that could, potentially, garner more attention, more positive attention, even from, some of the local officials or groups that may have look negatively at it, additionally. But the more people that say the same thing, it just gains attention. So I would say that, if it's something that you wanted to get involved with, just find a couple other people that, kind of have those similar interests, and just start a kind of a regular meetup. Like, hey, what can we do, to make this happen? And kind of start setting, giving tasks, for yourself, for that little group, about something that's attainable.
I would say research your community to figure out what is the temperature on tiny homes, the tiny home communities first,
Mhm.
because I think, like I said, it's not prohibited in Jackson, but naturally outside city limits, doing tiny home communities would be, or tiny homes in general would be easier, right? So I would say research your community. Also, do research on financing. For our first client, it was very, very hard to secure a mortgage at such a low rate. So it
Right.
is easier if you approach it as a tiny home community, like he's saying, versus as an individual. It's not impossible, but I feel like it's easier to secure capital. So I would say just research the climate, research what kind of capital exists out there. I would also say research or look at the bigger picture. Like, is it something that's going to be temporary, or is it something that you're interested in it being permanent? Because I think you should develop your community around that. Like, what would make somebody want to stick around a community long term? Is it offering amenities, sidewalks, and stuff like that? Or, if it's something that's short term, what's some things you can offer it to help people be able to stay there when they need it and then move on? So I said, figure out what you want to do first. I do think having like-minded people is important for the process as well, if that's possible. Sometimes people are on that journey on their own. So, but yeah, just research. I know when we first got started, maybe even before we started TINYJXN, I was like subscribed to alerts, and for many years, just every alert that would pop up, we were just reading it, sharing it and stuff, because it was part of educating people about it. And education is going to be really big. Like I said, a lot of people were in immediate opposition when they heard about it. But, if there's no official definition, but tiny home is usually between 400 and 700 square feet. And a lot of people stay in tiny homes. So it's like people are just upset really because it's really just ignorance, just because they're not well informed about the process, not that it's just a bad thing, like they're willingly being that way, but they just really don't know or understand. So yes, education is going to be important part of it as well. But I feel like, the common public, not that they do the best job, but I feel like we might be more educated on the process than our officials. So I would love to see a day where, government officials, policymakers, and banks also look at this as an alternative. Because if we don't address this, people think things are isolated, but it's going to start affecting all of us.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. I think that there is a lot that they don't know. And I think that sometimes when you don't know something about it, it makes you even more likely to be resistant towards it too. And I just think it's going to take a little bit of time to sort of convince people of the benefits, because I do think that this is going to help everyone. I don't think that creating tiny house communities only helps the people in those communities. It helps attract people to cities. It can help sort of like breathe new life into areas where maybe people, didn't think to travel to or didn't think to check things out, with some of the short-term rentals that people are offering in different parts of the country too. So yeah, I think it's an uphill battle for sure, but it's definitely something that we can do. It's doable. So I think that, the advice that you're giving it's really great advice. So I appreciate you both sort of taking the time to talk about that too.
Thank you.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you both for being on the channel. I think that in general, it's great to have you guys on, because it's important to sort of highlight what's going on in the industry, just all over the country. That's one of the things that is really important to me about this sort of channel, but also to just giving people a chance to get to know you, sort of put like faces to names. Your website, everything that you're doing, your Instagram will be sort of included in the video description. So hopefully they can reach out to you, ask questions. You can meet more like-minded people through just sort of taking the time to chat with me and chat with people on the channel too. So thank you guys again. And I'm happy to have you on again in the future too, as things sort of continue to develop with you all. I know you have some really great ideas. So thanks.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. All right, so that was my conversation with Ashlee and Akili. I appreciate them so much for taking the time to sort of talk to us about what led them to creating the Kelly Factory. It's a really awesome story, just sort of the heart that they have for their community, and just also being open and honest and transparent about some of the challenges they've experienced as well too, and just sort of where we have to go, sort of like how far we've come a really far way when it comes to tiny houses and the tiny house community, but there is still a little bit more sort of like room for growth in terms of getting cities involved and sort of helping people see the vision and see the sort of like the importance of tiny houses for affordable housing. So thank you again to Akili and Ashlee for taking the time to chat with us. Please take the time to sort of like check out what they're doing, their website, links to their social media, reach out to them if you have questions, if you want to learn more about how you can sort of like create something similar to what they're creating in their area. They're great people to sort of reach out to. So yeah, make sure you take time to do that. And if you're new to the channel, please do take the time to subscribe. It helps me out a ton. There's a subscribe button at the bottom of your screen. And if you tap the notification bell, you find out when I drop new videos. I drop new videos every single week. I appreciate you guys so much for taking the time to watch this video and supporting the channel. Please do drop a comment in the comment section for this video if there's anything you want to see, if there's anyone you think I should reach out to that you'd like to see on the channel. And as always, don't forget to think tiny. I'll see you guys in the next one.